Coming up on the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast.
What I try to teach people to do is know that the number one authority for you is you and the way you feel. Like, for example, I'm going to go back to my experience with keto. I read everything that was out there. Of course, remember, this was 2014. So, that'll help you see what was out there. But I read everything that was out there. I fully bought into the science behind why this was going to work for me. And I was convinced. And then my body hated it. And, people are like, well, you just weren't doing it right. Well, no, my body really didn't like it. I'm telling the truth there. Then I reintroduced carbs, started doing intermittent fasting, and the weight started to come off. And I immediately felt better. With the addition of carbs, I felt so much better and went on to lose all the weight I wanted to lose while eating carbs the whole time.
Hello, and welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I'm Brian Grin, and I'm here to give you actionable tips to get your body back to what it once was 5, 10, even 15 years ago. Each week, I'll give you an in-depth interview with a health expert from around the world to cut through the fluff and get you long-term sustainable results. This week, I interviewed New York Times best-selling author and podcast host Gin Stephens. She's just releasing her new book, Cleanish, and Cleanish leads readers to focus on real foods and a healthier home environment free of toxins without fixating on perfection. So in this interview, we discussed the importance of having a true why when it comes to losing weight, how to avoid paralysis of analysis, her hybrid fasting approach, and the importance of crowding out processed foods. This was my second time around with Gin. I really enjoyed it. I know you will too. And thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. All right. Welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. My name is Brian Grin, and I have a special guest the second time around, Gin Stephens. Welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. And I love that, the second part of your podcast name is Eat Clean. Today, we're going to be Eat Cleanish, right?
Exactly. We're going to say a lot of issues today.
There you go.
Mainly because Gin is coming out with a new book, which she sent to me. Very nice. And it is called Cleanish. Right? I have it right here.
Yes. Yeah, there it is. I love the way that cover turned out. I got to have a lot of input in that, which was nice. And I was like, no. And then I got to make suggestions. I loved the whole part of that.
Yeah, I think it looks great. And my first question for you is what did you learn most about writing a book? We know this is probably a big undertaking. I mean, this is quite the book. This is over, almost 400 pages.
Yeah. It's quite a book. It's a lot of information. It's not my first time at this book writing rodeo. It's really funny. If we go back, I wrote my first book in 2016, Delay Don't Deny. And that was, I self-published that one. It's quite a different process to self-publish versus going through a traditional publisher. Now, I'm not going to really admit out loud how quickly I wrote Delay Don't Deny, but let's just say I did a lot of thinking about it over time, right? But from actual sitting down with my computer to having it out in the world was not as long as you might think. It just kind of flowed out of me. I put it out there. I was trying to get it out by January 1st. So bam, there it was. And, but the process of writing a book with a traditional publisher, we actually started first talking about Cleanish in what year is it now? It's hard to
what are we
in 2020? Yeah, everything's a blur. So in 2020, we started getting the idea together, and then finally got it's a go to write it from my publisher. And I mean, this book, I started really, really, really digging into the research in January of, I started putting some outlining together, and I had it kind of mapped out before that, but really digging in January of 2021, and it was due by March 31st. So I had to work really, really a lot on it, but I also was late turning it in, which for a teacher like me, that's hard to admit because I like deadlines, but they were okay with it.
Yeah. Wow. So you had about 3 months to put it together.
It ended up being about 3.5. And the good thing is when you turn in your first draft, you still have time to, go in and make changes and, make it better all along the way. Like the version you got from the publisher is an early reader copy. So the formatting isn't right. It still has more typos, but it goes through a lot of eyes look at it between, when I turned it in April and now. So,
and I'm curious, there's a foreword by Dr. Tim Spector,
yes,
who's the author of Spoon Fed. And what is his what does he do with this book? Does he just go through it and help you with it, or how does that
No,
work?
he just wrote the foreword.
Okay.
Yeah, he is somebody that I've looked up to since before I wrote my first book. I read his first book, The Diet Myth, in probably, it might have been 2015. And so it was right when I had lost the weight that I needed to lose. I lost over 80 pounds altogether with intermittent fasting from 14 to 15. But I read his book, The Diet Myth, because I was really reading, just anything I could get my hands on. I was, now like really loving to learn about my body and foods and all of that.
Right.
And he, his background, first of all, he's done a lot of work with identical twins, some of his research, which I've always found to be fascinating. Like the stories of identical twins separated at birth and they meet up, 50 years later and they each have a white fence around a tree and their wife's name is Betty or something,
Right.
So I've always been fascinated by the role of genetics in our life. But he also studies the gut microbiome. So really, it was the first I had read about the gut microbiome. And he also talked a little bit about fasting in there. So I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, I really like what he has to say. So when his next book came out, sorry, my phone's ringing. I'm going to turn that off. When it was my husband, I'll talk to him later.
Yeah.
When his next book came out, Spoon Fed, I read that one and he goes even into more detail. And so I was following his work. Well, he's doing something now called the PREDICT studies, where they're trying to figure out, the whole concept of bioindividuality and that our bodies are all different when it comes to how we react to things. And it's
Right.
an interplay between yes, our genetics, that plays a role, but the gut microbiome plays an even more powerful role. So with the PREDICT studies, they're really looking at individuals, analyzing the gut microbiome, looking at, using a continuous glucose monitor to see how your body responds to what you eat. How quickly does your body clear fat? How quickly does your body clear glucose after you eat? All of those are predictors of, what foods are going to work well for you. So I was aware of his work and actually participated in PREDICT 3 through their Zoe program. And turns out I didn't do it as Jen Stevens. I just did it as a person. I'm like, I'm just going to sign up for this. I'm going to do it. And I did it. Well, they figured out who I was, I guess. And so they sent me an email and they're like, we would like to have a special, talk with you about your results. And when we were having the conference call, I was like, do you do this with everybody? They're like, no, we knew it was you. And I'm like, well, nice to meet you. I didn't even know. It was kind of funny. But from that, we, started partnering up because I recommend the Zoe program to everybody. And they're like, would you like to officially work with us as, like an affiliate and, talk about how we can promote it? And I'm like, well, I would love that. And in the meantime, then, the people I was talking to know Tim, right? They work with Tim. And so on one call, I was like, I'm working on a book. This is last spring. I'm working on a new book. And it really seems like something that he would like. I wonder if he would write the foreword for it.
So you just asked him. Okay.
I just asked. And the person who worked with him very, very closely was like, I'll talk to him and see what he says. And then he agreed to do it. And so when it got to the point that I'd already written Cleanish, I sent a copy to him. It was an electronic copy at that point. And I was like, what if he hates? But he didn't, and he did write the foreword, and so that was just exciting because he's a real hard scientist doing the research that I really look up to. And so for him to find value in the book and like it, that was I don't know, but this is just garbage, Jen, I don't know. No. But he didn't say that, so that was good. So that was a long answer to your question.
What did you gain from the studies that you did with him? That's
a great question. I learned that, first of all, no surprise, my body does not clear fat well. And so if I eat too much fat, it's inflammatory for my body. That did not surprise me at all because I never felt great when I did a low carb, high fat kind of eating. Like keto made me feel inflamed and awful. And it makes sense.
Yeah, it's
too much fat for my body. We're not all the same.
No, yeah.
But I also learned I don't clear the sugar very well either, blood glucose. Like my body doesn't clear that quickly. So it just helped me to realize, well, it made sense also why, even when I was a little girl, if I ate, too many sweets, I could feel that blood sugar crash and my body just doesn't do well with that. So I just have to be more intentional. Really, it's all about how you combine the foods. And that might, harken back to crazy food combining diets from the past, but it just means if I eat something that's higher carb, also having the fat and the protein with it slows the absorption. It just has to do with how your body processes it. Like, if I drink straight sugar, that's very different than if I have, something that has more protein with it anyway.
Right. And that probably goes for most people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it is interesting how you say you don't clear fat as well. Because, obviously the keto diet's the big craze now. And, for someone like myself, I would say I do eat on the, I would say I have probably more fat than normal, but, yeah, I feel great with it, but yeah,
See?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's bio individuality. And I 100% believe people who feel great on it and say that they do. But when I was trying to do it, this is before I lost all the weight with intermittent fasting. It was 2014. I, was on Facebook at that time, joined a bunch of keto groups. And the advice was, well, just keto harder. If you're not feeling good, you're doing it wrong. Right. And knowing now that, actually, no, I wasn't doing it wrong because I can follow rules really well, but I felt so bad. But now it makes sense why I felt so bad. And honestly, the crazy low fat diets that I didn't really do very well back in the 90s, I lost great on a low fat diet. So of course I was doing it really wrong. I was doing the whole ultra processed, eat the snack wells. If y'all remember
I was just
that.
reading about them. I remember those snack well cookies.
Yeah.
My mom bought those.
Yeah. They were free foods because they had no fat. And no, that also is wrong.
Yeah.
That was a very ultra processed, heavy way to do the diet. And when you actually go back and read those low fat books from the 90s, they were not encouraging snack wells and SpaghettiOs. They were like, eat real food, just not as much fat. So I'm like, oh, I ignored all that part.
Yeah, I think a lot of people did.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do. And you talk about in the book, just getting back to that, because I went through it. I didn't get to read the whole thing because I've had it for a few days, but yeah, some of the highlights, this quote I took from it: the goal of the book is to teach and remind you of the why and help you develop your how.
Yeah.
And I really like that because I think a lot of times that gets lost in all this. Oh, well, what should I eat? When should I eat? And you get sort of confused, but if you really don't have a true reason why you're actually doing the things that you're doing for your health, then it's tough to make any progress.
That's 100% true. My background, this about me, I was an elementary teacher for 28 years. I taught kids. And, I know that when the kids, for example, understood why they were doing what they were doing, whether you're teaching them math or teaching them to raise their hands, I mean, it's everything. When they understand the why, they're more motivated to stick with something. So everything that I write is from that point of view of, I'm going to teach you the important things that you need to know. And then you're going to know why you're going to do those things. And then you're going to be more likely to do them. Like in the whole process of getting cleanish, I can make food lists, tell you what to eat, what not to eat, when to eat it, whatever. That's not going to give you meaningful change. Right. But when you start understanding why, you're like, oh, artificial sweeteners disrupt my gut microbiome to the degree that they actually makes it hard for me to lose weight down the line. Oh, now I understand why I probably should avoid artificial sweeteners. They're not like this magical, helpful thing that we've been told they were, because they actually damage our gut microbiomes. So when you understand the why, you're like, okay, well, I don't want that.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And, I think another thing that I found from the book is you talk a little bit about like paralysis of analysis.
Yeah.
As well. And I think that's more and more prevalent today, because I think every other day something new comes out, or there's like a new opinion, or there's a study that probably doesn't have any much basis behind it, but it's out there. And so, even myself, being in the health industry for so long, I'm like, well, one person just talked so great about fiber, and another person just talked it down. So,
yes.
You could really, you got Paul Saladino with carnivore and talking about how, perhaps you don't need fiber. And then, I'm just looking at your book and some other, I don't know if you read a book called Metabolical. Have you heard this?
I've not read Metabolical, but my co-host on the Intermittent Fasting podcast, I think she interviewed him for her podcast. She has one called the Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast. Okay, I think she interviewed him.
Yeah. I really do enjoy the book, but he's big into fiber, and it's just like, you just have these differing opinions. So there can be a little bit of paralysis of analysis, like which way to go. How do you go about, sort of not getting, too caught up in every other opinion out there.
That's really huge. And what I try to teach people to do is know that the number one authority for you is you
Right,
and the way
right.
you feel. Like, for example, I'm going to go back to my experience with keto. I read everything that was out there. Of course, remember, this was 2014. So, that'll help you see what was out there. But I read everything that was out there. I fully bought into the science behind why this was going to work for me. And I was convinced. And then my body hated it. And, people are like, well, you just weren't doing it right. Well, no, my body really didn't like it. I'm telling the truth there. Then I reintroduced carbs, started doing intermittent fasting, and the weight started to come off. And I immediately felt better. With the addition of carbs, I felt so much better and went on to lose all the weight I wanted to lose while eating carbs the whole time. So, for someone to say, for example, no one needs carbs, which I've heard people say, and that's like kind of the mantra in the keto world. There is no requirement for carbs in the human body. You don't need them. Well, my brain chemistry needs them. I feel better when I eat them. I feel satisfied when I eat. When I was eating keto, I never one time felt like I was satisfied from eating. And you can trust your body. And I knew I didn't feel good, and I also wasn't losing any weight. So I think it's just, getting rid of that noise and giving yourself permission to eat and figure out what feels good to you.
Right.
The whole idea of fiber, I talk about this in Cleanish a bit, and whether fiber works well for your gut or not has a lot to do with the health of your gut and what lives in your gut. And if we eat the standard American diet, which so many of us, have eaten over the years, and it's the mainstay of most people in America, right? And if you're eating the standard American diet, that damages your gut. Absolutely, over time.
Right.
All the processed foods, it's the standard American diet is a very low fiber diet in general. Most Americans are not getting very much fiber, and you have all the chemicals in there, which also damage your gut. Then you end up with a very unhealthy gut microbiome profile in general. So now let's say someone with a very unhealthy gut decides they're going to just change everything and they're going to eat, like, I don't know, maybe you're going to be whole food vegan, whatever. You start eating that way. Oh, and you feel terrible and it makes your gut feel worse. And well, that's because you're in a place where your gut is not healthy. And maybe you feel fabulous. Let's just say carnivore, you're just eating meat and you don't feel that digestive upset. But that's a function of the fact that your gut has been damaged based on possibly decades of poor dietary choices. So it's a matter of adding it back in more gradually. A healthy gut does tolerate a variety of things. A healthy gut can tolerate foods that our ancestors were eating. Go back and what were your ancestors eating? They were not eating 100% meat. I guarantee it. Even in places like the Arctic, the Inuit have been like held up as like, well, look, they're so healthy. They just eat a lot of, keto-y kind of a thing. But in the seasons where they could eat plant foods, they did. They ate them when they were available.
Right.
So, natural populations ate in all sorts of different ways and were healthy. There are populations that lived, in the tropics and ate like 100% carbs practically. And they were very, very healthy, but they were eating real foods. And it's just a matter of real food. It really comes down to real foods. And also, like I just said, an unhealthy gut, an unhealthy body may not tolerate all real foods, but you really can build back up that tolerance for a lot of things. Does that mean every food works for everybody forever and ever? No.
Yeah, I completely agree. It does come down to like sort of a self-experimentation.
Yes.
Because I can remember for a while, I used to have like a big salad with some type of protein in the middle of the day. And it slowed me down quite a bit. And so I actually backed off a little bit on that and went a little bit more protein fat combination, maybe eggs and avocado. And I felt like that sustained energy throughout the day kept going, as opposed to feeling like it sort of weighed me down. And eating a nice big salad with a good protein is technically a healthy meal for most people. Some people can't tolerate it as much as others, but you have to sort of try both. and see how you feel. Maybe don't try it for a day, maybe try it for a week. It's almost like the saying, like if you're like Brad Kearns talks about, if you're having these meals and you're getting up, gas and an upset stomach, well, something's going on.
Right.
That you really shouldn't be having it. I always, so like you said, just keep an eye on how you're feeling, or, things like dairy and stuff. Some people can tolerate, some people can't.
Dairy is an interesting conversation because really probably only about 25% of us are genetically able to handle dairy well.
Right.
And it has to do with whether you're lactase persistent or not.
Right.
And it goes way back to your ancestors. Again, we know what dairy is. Dairy is food for babies of mammals. That's what it was designed for. And so we have the enzyme lactase that shuts off after we get out of babyhood and then we get into adulthood. But for about 25% of us, our ancestors relied on dairy as part of their diet. And so you're lactase persistent as you go through life, meaning you can still digest it well, tolerate it into adulthood. And I've had my DNA analyzed. I am lactase persistent, which is exciting. I can eat dairy, and when I say dairy works well for me and I feel great, it's true. But for the 75% of people that are not, when dairy causes them problems, that is also true. So it's just when people make blanket statements like, yeah, dairy is just for babies. It's just for, it's not for adult humans. They might feel really bad from it, and it's not for them, but that doesn't mean it's universal.
Yeah. And have you tried raw dairy?
I live in a state where we can't get it.
Okay.
I'm so sad. I would like,
try
I actually have tried it. If I go back to my childhood, I remember, a friend of mine her dad was a dairy farmer in Virginia. So there was raw dairy. Let me tell you,
once you go raw dairy, you're not going to want to go back to regular.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because we got some, I just tried it a few weeks ago. We drove, there's a farm like 45 minutes outside Chicago. And we actually waited in line. If it tells you, we waited in line, and then we were like the last person. They have only a certain amount to give out every day. We almost missed the cutoff. I'm like, if we missed the cutoff
after waiting in line
outside in the cold, but we made it, and we got our first try at raw dairy. And I will say, I'm definitely going to go back. It doesn't obviously last that long,
right? So
about a week.
Like food is not supposed to last for, right? That's like
a telltale sign that something's, good.
Yeah. I saw on Instagram the other day, someone had happy birthday McDonald's meal, and it was an 11-year-old cheeseburger and fries that her daughter had used in a science project 11 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And it looks exactly like she just had it last week. Like, you would expect a week-old burger to look a little dehydrated and maybe dried up if you found a fry under your car seat. You know what I mean? This is 11 years old, and it looked like.
So wait, they kept it for 11 years?
Yes, they've had it for 11 years.
So
happy birthday.
Year.
Yeah, every year they wish it happy birthday. So, but it looks the same as it did 11 years ago. And so that tells us right there. I mean, do you think that is good for your body to go through? Like, it has so many preservatives and chemicals in it that it literally doesn't rot. And so now think about what that does to your gut. Our gut is alive, and the gut bacteria that live there they're like, so many of them down there that have to, and now we're putting these chemicals in there that are keeping a burger fresh. Well, not fresh, but
right.
Yeah. I would need it, but you know what I mean?
No, I hear you. Yeah. I mean, that's a good way, sort of a good rule of thumb is if it lasts more than, I don't know, a week, it's probably not good for you.
If it lasts for 11 years sitting there, it's really not good for you.
Yeah. Another highlight from the book that I wanted to talk about was you mentioned something about a hybrid fasting approach. I thought that was interesting. I think you talked about maybe like an every other day protocol. What was the basis behind that?
Yep. Cleanish is not a fasting book. It has one chapter on fasting because that's one of our body's best self-cleaning mechanisms. So fasting is just one of them. But, I've lived an intermittent fasting lifestyle since 2014, and there's so many different ways you can structure it. There tends to be two main approaches. One, time restricted eating, which is the daily eating window approach. And that's what I do now. But there's other approaches like alternate daily fasting. Some people might have heard of the every other day diet. That was a book that came out a while back. Also, maybe 5-2, which was very popular in the UK, especially because Dr. Michael Mosley lives in the UK and he was on TV promoting the 5-2 diet. So if you're in the UK, you've probably heard of 5-2. It wasn't quite as big here in America, but people tend to think of you're either going to do time restricted eating and have a daily eating window, or you're going to do 5-2 or 4-3 or every other day, but you can actually mix them up together. With 5-2, for example, there were 2 days where you fasted and the other 5 were eat normally. In the every other day diet or the alternate daily fasting, it was fast day, eat day, fast day, eat day. And you just kept doing that. Mm-hmm. So people think, well, you're either going to do this or you're going to do that, but you can put them together in kind of a hybrid approach. It's just wording that I came up with, and there's no like scientific like hybrid approach studies, right? But you can put them together. So the rule of thumb is, based on the research we know about alternate daily fasting, after every fast day or down day, they had what's called an up day, where you are not having a restrictive eating day. Participants in the research ate about 125% of their daily caloric needs on their up days. Mm-hmm. So that's really important. They found that kept the metabolism going strong. So if you have a full fast for, let's say, 36 hours, the next day should be an up day where you're eating, more than your body needs, because that's what's protective of your metabolic rate in general after longer fasting. But then the day after the up day, you might have a 5-hour eating window, doing time restricted eating. Mm-hmm. And then maybe the day after that you have 4-hour eating window or a 7-hour eating window or whatever. It's fine to switch it up. Then maybe you want to have another down day or another 36-hour fast. Then the next day would be an up day. So you just keep sprinkling them all together. The only rule that I would really think people should follow is, after any down day, have an up day. But then the other days can be what you prefer. So it's kind of a hybrid approach. And a lot of people really love it. In my community, we have something that I don't follow it, but it's Mealless Monday. One of my group moderators, Roxy, she started having Mealless Monday and kind of encouraging people to try a longer fast on Monday, just if it felt good. So Mealless Monday became a thing. And then Tuesday was an up day, but not for everybody, just if you wanted to. Then the rest of the week could be what you wanted. But I like to eat every day. So I don't have a Mealless Monday. I'm also not trying to lose weight. So
that's the thing, is like, I get the question a lot. They're like, oh, well, can I fast from this time to this time? And for the most part, I say yes. Like, or can I eat from this time to this time? There's really not a perfect way. It's similar like what we talked about for eating. It's sort of a self-experimentation when it comes to fasting. And I think most importantly is have it fit like whatever your day's like that day, or whatever your week is like. Like, for example, we were just traveling, and not the longest flight, whatever, 3-hour flight, but travel days are longer days. And it just worked out that I ended up just fasting the whole day. Yeah. And in my mind, I had it. I'm like, this will be a perfect time to do a little bit of an extended fast. And I did one, and it just worked out great. The fact that I was, flying and in places where I probably shouldn't be eating their food anyways. So, I think with fasting, if you just make it dictate what your day's like, and whether that's activity level or if you're traveling, I think that's just a good rule of thumb to go by. And if you're really busy, I actually think it's a great time to do some fasting and skip a meal or two.
It's true. This week, right now I'm at our little beach cottage. I'm here with my son, but 2 days before we came, I was recording podcasts until probably 6 p.m. And so it was a very busy day. So I didn't eat until after 6 p.m. that day because I was very busy. I don't like to eat and then record podcasts because I'm not quite as mentally sharp after I eat. But so that day I didn't eat till after 6. And then when I came to the beach that day, we drove down, my son and I. Yeah, it's about 3.5, 4. It was a 4-hour drive that day because they're doing some road construction on I-20. Never fun. But so we sat in traffic for a while. And again, I was like, well, we did our grocery shopping. So we were ready at the while we were going to be here. And then we didn't get to dinner until it was again, probably 6:30. So I had fasted until then. So then yesterday, after having 2 days with longer fasts, I was like, I'm ready to open my window a little earlier. So we went and we had something around like lunchtime kind of a thing. And so I'm going to, I had 2 meals yesterday and a longer, probably my eating window was 9 hours. Whereas the days before it had been like, 1 hour.
1 hour, right?
Yeah. It was like, I opened it, I ate my meal, and then I was done for the day for 2 days in a row. So it's all about being flexible. And I felt fabulous, fasting longer on those days. Mm-hmm. And then I also, yesterday, my body was like, it'd be good to open a little earlier today. I was a little hungrier. And so I needed to eat a little more. But you learn how to listen.
Right. You talk about, it's like you hear the word intuitive eating.
Yeah.
And I always say, the more you fast, you become more in tune with your hunger hormones and what true hunger is and what true satiety is.
It's true. I think, all the constant eating, that I used to do before fasting really disconnected me from my hunger and satiety hormones. I tried intuitive eating before I was an intermittent faster. I read all those books. I told you I was reading everything back then. I read all of the books. And again, it made so much sense. I'm like, this is going to be my answer. So I put away my scale. I always ask myself, am I hungry? The answer was always, yeah.
Right.
Whenever I asked myself, are you hungry? Yeah. So I would eat. And so I intuitively ate myself up to 210 pounds. And that was the most recent thing I had been doing. And then I got on the scale and I was 210 pounds. And I was like, okay, intuitive eating is not working for me. I am 0% intuitive at this point. Right. But a funny thing happened. The longer I did intermittent fasting, I consider myself to be an intuitive eater now. But it's within the paradigm of intermittent fasting. And the thing that makes me a little sad is that the intuitive eating community absolutely rejects intermittent fasting as a whole. Like, really? Yes, in general, like a guy, I can't think of the author's name. Off the top of my head, the book Intuitive Fasting. Have you heard of Intuitive Fasting?
Yeah. I think I know who you're talking about.
But... Is it Cole, Dr. Ryan? Is it Ryan Cole? I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, Cole, I think is his last name. I'm sorry. I apologize. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But, okay. I thought, oh, what a beautiful title, Intuitive Fasting, because that's very much what I feel like I do. But then when it came out, it was just like the people came out of the woodwork and gave it terrible reviews, hadn't even read it, but they were like, this is not intuitive. This is bad. This is dieting. And it was the intuitive eating community just slammed it. And it made me really sad that we could work together and realize that these two approaches to me really do work together. I've never felt more intuitive than I do now. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, one of the things I found from your book as well was you talk about crowding out. And I really like that as like, it's like a little hack. I think that I talked with Dr. Ted Naiman recently on the podcast, and, he mentioned like he eats junk sometimes, but he does it at the end, you always hear about dessert at the end, but like I think your example in the book maybe had to do with chips or something. But
chips, that's my thing. We've got chips here now. And I'm like, all right, I had a few. Yeah. Because we bought them for my son, but
I know, God forbid, it was fun. We were on vacation. My wife and I, we don't have a ton of carbs, and and she was eating chips, and I was just giving her a hard time, just, and fun. And she actually cut her mouth on the chip.
Oh,
and she was bleeding. I said, that's what happens.
Yeah.
Eat the chips.
I dropped a pina colada. I was at a conference in Arizona in October, standing next to a well-known diet guru whose name you would probably recognize. And, she doesn't eat gluten, dairy, sugar. And I was having just a pina colada, just straight up a pina colada. And I dropped it on her feet, right?
Oh, no.
Right there at the pool, bam, it went everywhere. You know how that feels when you're like, okay, embarrassing. But she's like, you shouldn't have been drinking that anyway. Yeah, right. And I like, it was funny. That's and, funny. She's not mad at me about it. But anyway, it's like revenge of the pina colada.
Yeah, right. You dropped a sugar drink on the
no sugar person. She's lovely though, so it wasn't.
But yeah, let's talk about crowding out.
Okay.
The philosophy behind that is, I'll let you explain it.
All right. I actually heard the wording, first of all, I went through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, just because I wanted to really, have a credential of some sort in the food and nutrition world. And they have a health coaching program, and I really liked their philosophy. So I'm going to go through this and see what they have to say. I loved it.
Yeah, I did too back years
Did you
ago.
go through Institute for Integrative Nutrition?
Yeah,
I don't know if I knew that. Did I know that about you?
I think we originally talked. Yeah.
My brain is like full, things come out. So anyway, but I loved their program because they're very much about, bio individuality also. And like they talk about a lot of different things, but the whole idea of crowding out is something that really, that they used that wording as I was going through it. And I'm like, that really makes sense. And it's just, again, like you said, have the dessert last. Eat we need to eat for nutrition. Our bodies need the nutrients. And I didn't even really, I know that might sound dumb. We grew up hearing that take your vitamin, that's all you need these vitamins. But really, when I was researching for Cleanish, we need foods from plants, all those phytochemicals and all the nutrients, all the things that we're getting from our foods. We don't even know what they all are. So it's very important that we're putting in these highly nutritious foods, whatever that looks like to your dietary paradigm, right. Whether you're eating organ meats because you're carnivore or whatever that looks like, the highly nutritious foods go in first.
Yeah.
And because that's what our bodies are looking for. Our bodies don't count calories. They look for nutrients. Right. And so, if I drove through the Golden Arches, I have a story in Fast Feast Repeat where one day I think I had a Big Mac and I had fries and I had a Coke, and that's sufficient calories. That's a lot of energy, right? Coming into your body. But I spent the whole rest of the evening wandering around the kitchen because I just wasn't satisfied. Right. And I'm like, this is really my body saying that wasn't what we were looking for, And so if you've ever eaten a lot of junk food and then just felt like you needed to keep eating, that's because your body is not nutritionally satisfied. So when you focus on the highly nutritious foods, your body is going to be satisfied. Then you can have in that, at the end, that ice cream or whatever, but you're not going to want to eat the whole gallon because you're satisfied from the nutritious foods you had.
Yeah, no, it's great. And, you also talk about, well, I've talked about it before, is prioritizing protein, I think is really as the basis around each meal. Because most people, and I even think I do to some degree, undereat protein. I'm active and I have a meal to 2 meals, and I'm thinking to myself, how much, if I'm going to get a pound per body weight or per lean mass, let's just say that's I weigh 170. Let's say my goal was 150 grams of protein. I mean, I got to really, really look hard to find, that amount of protein and put that in my diet. And especially as you get older, because you don't absorb it as well either.
Right. I'm a big fan of the protein leverage hypothesis. I'm sure you're familiar with that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, again, like I just was talking about, our bodies let us know. The protein leverage hypothesis states that you will keep eating if you haven't had enough protein, because your body is searching for the amount of protein that it needs. So if you haven't given it sufficient protein, you will keep eating and want more and more and more until you've met that protein need. And I love the whole idea that our body is wise and that we can listen to those signals. I was sick at the beginning of November. I had a fever and I just didn't have much of an appetite. So I really couldn't eat a lot. Meat was not attractive to me at all. I was like, I just don't, I was eating like eggs and things that said egg sandwiches. I needed a different kind of food. But after I recovered, Like for about 4 days when I was totally well and myself again, all I wanted was meat. I was like, give me the meat. It's like my body was like, okay, let's rebuild some of that. It was craving it. And I listened, and I don't normally eat giant meat heavy meals, but my body told me I needed it. And so just as my body said, you don't want to eat meat right now when I was sick, it just wasn't appetizing. Once I was better, my body's like, all right, let's have some meat.
Yeah, no. And that's a good point. And also you talk about in your book, cleaning up the home, cleaning up the yard. I really, and then one thing I will say I really like too about the book is there's almost like, there's places in here where you can sort of journal.
Yeah.
And I like that because a while back I did a journal. I wrote a journal, the intermittent fasting journal, but in here you can definitely fill out and put in your choices as far as what you're going to do. But you talk about cleaning out the house and the yard.
And your personal care products, all that is so important, and that's the whole thing that really led me down the rabbit hole, being an intermittent faster and knowing that my body has that self-cleaning going on every day. I was like, well, what about all the other stuff that we're putting in? And of course, if you start talking about it with food, we're not putting in the artificial flavors, artificial sweeteners. We're not putting in the preservatives, but what are you putting on your skin?
Right.
And we all know that the skin is a delivery system for drugs, for example. Like we've all seen the patch, birth control patches, the nicotine patch. We know that transdermal medication delivery, and my husband, when he was getting his PhD in medicinal chemistry, one of the professors that he worked with, her specialty was transdermal medication applications that go in through the skin. So everything that you put on your skin goes into your skin. So when you're putting on, your makeup, and I started really, I have a friend, Melanie Avalon, that's my co-host with the Intermittent Fasting podcast. And she's been talking to me about this for years, even like the kind of makeup that she uses. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Then she sent me some. I'm like, okay, oh wait, this is really good makeup. I like it. It has to be good. That's part of something I talk about in Cleanish. It has to work. We're not going to change things up and they don't work. But I was using it because I liked it and it seemed like a good thing. But the more I researched for Cleanish, endocrine disruptors in our personal care products.
Oh my God. All over the place.
It's a huge deal. It's huge.
And the detergent. Detergent, right?
You start reading it and you're like, oh, this really is huge. And so, I changed all my cleaning products at my house. And, we're all victims of something called greenwashing. I talk about this in Cleanish, and I didn't realize how I had been so duped by greenwashing. I thought I was making good choices. And because I was buying products that, had the green kind of labeling. And when I started looking into them, no, they had, I use an app. I talk about it in Cleanish. Environmental Working Group has a great companion app that lets you put things in and they give it a score and tell you why it might not be a good choice. And this dish soap that I was using that I thought was a good choice, I think I got like a D or something. I'm like, what? And so like the Blue brand that we're all familiar with that they use to clean the animals of the oil spills, that actually got a higher score than this one that I thought was, so clean and good. And anyway.
EWG.org, right?
Right.
EWG.org.
Yes.
You can check if the product sort of meets these standards.
And they have an app on the App Store, and it's really good. And I use it all the time now. But once I'm the kind of person that likes to, get my core brands that, like with the makeup that I use, they are like, so like, we do not put these things in our products. So I don't even have to research theirs. I just know they're good. If I buy anything they've got, I'm set. And the same with like certain, cleaning brands, like the one that I use right now, it comes with a concentrate that you make all your other stuff out of, including your laundry detergent. It's super easy. And then you can, like I use organic essential oils to give, my counter spray a little pepperminty smell. So but what you don't want is all those fragrances that they put in.
Right. You want to find the fragrance free cleaning supplies and the
absolutely
detergents and things like that.
But even more so than that, they can call something, they use, like they can say it's unscented or whatever, but then they're actually putting in masking agents to cover up. And so that's like even worse. So you just really have to make sure. And that's why researching each thing, like our laundry detergent that we were using, it was a free and clear kind of a thing. But still, when I really looked into it, it wasn't it. And these are easy changes to make. I want my laundry to be clean and not to have all the toxins in it. And once you find a brand that just works, it's easy. And you're not really giving up anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and these are things that you got to sort of just be your own, like you got to just be your own investigator on this stuff, because what you're going to hear in the mainstream is probably, if it's in the mainstream and it's on TV, you probably don't want to buy it.
That's right. You're right.
You really
That's
don't.
very true. That's very true. And it just once you get into a good routine with it, and it's not necessarily going to be like super duper more expensive, because the one that I use now, again, it comes as a concentrate. The ones you're buying at the store are mostly water. So here I am with this concentrate. It ends up being pretty economical over time, and I know that I'm making a good choice. And I also don't need 82 different cleaning products from my house. This one concentrate that I'm using does everything. And
what's the brand, if you don't mind?
Well, I use Branch Basics.
Branch Basics. Okay.
Yeah, Branch Basics is what I've been using because they just work really well. I actually reached out to them and said, "Can I try your products? Send them to me. They look really good," and they did, and I love them. So
check it out.
Yeah, Branch Basics, and they're all unscented, but I add essential oils to give them the scent that I like. Like I like tea tree oil for my bathroom cleaner because it just gives it that
little
bit of clean smell, but not in a dangerous way.
So what would you say, with your book, you wrote it in 3 or 4 months. What would you say the biggest message is that you want to get across to readers when it comes out in January?
Yeah, it's a process, and that perfection is not required. I talk about it, and it's a concept that I first heard years ago when my son was having issues with food sensitivities and chemical sensitivity. It's called the bucket effect. And it makes a lot of sense. We all have a bucket. Let's call this your toxic load bucket of what your body can handle. As stuff goes into your bucket, your body can deal with it. We've got all these self-cleaning mechanisms, but there comes a point where your personal bucket gets full. And then if anything else goes in it, it overflows. And now you're having all of these, symptoms and problems and inflammation. So it's all about getting our personal bucket lower. So we're going to intentionally put less in. You're still going to come across toxins. I went out to eat yesterday. I don't know what they've
put in the food.
What was in their food. I'm sure there was stuff in there I wouldn't have at home.
Right.
And that's okay, because I intentionally put less in through my personal care products and through my cleaning products and through what I eat. Right. And so I also help my body self-clean through eating nutritious foods most of the time. And by doing intermittent fasting, I have a sauna, I jump on a rebounder, I have a vibration plate, stimulates my lymphatic system. All those things that I do, help my body self-clean. And so that helps lower, your toxic load in your bucket. So you don't want to get to the point where you're just, paralyzed by fear, because, it can be scary when you start hearing about endocrine disruptors and all these chemicals that are everywhere, and, babies being born with these chemicals in their cord blood. You're like, oh no, we need to live in a bubble. But that's also not possible. We're living in this modern world, but it's just a matter of intentionally lowering what goes in and helping your body through self-cleaning, and knowing that every time you make a choice, you're helping in the long run.
Yeah. It's all those little choices that you make throughout the day, and that adds up over time. But it's, again, like you say in the book, it's not about being perfect.
Right.
And even like, you hear all these health experts come on. I had, like I said, I had Dr. Ted Naiman on, and he's not a perfect eater. And I think that just needs to, I think with Instagram and everyone's got a perfect body, it's just,
I do not have a perfect body.
Me neither. Although I'm trying. No, I'm kidding.
I'm a 52-year-old woman on the other side of menopause. I'm just embracing who I am now at this point, and that's okay.
Right. Exactly. So embrace who you are. Yeah. Self-experiment as much as you can. Find what works for you, and you'll come out on the other end. Right.
Absolutely. And really learn to trust yourself. If you have a hunch that, something works for you or doesn't work for you, go with that. You've got all the wisdom you need. You don't need me to tell you what to eat. You don't need me to tell you, although Cleanish will help you figure it out for yourself. It's very much, at the end of it, you develop your own personal definition of cleanish eating and cleanish living. And then you choose the tools you want to implement into your life. Maybe one of them is intermittent fasting. Maybe it isn't. Maybe one of them is upping your vegetable intake, or maybe you don't want to do that. It's just a matter of choosing the tools that work for you and feeling empowered. That's really what I want people to come away from anything that I write, feeling empowered and not scared, feeling that you've got the tools and you've got the wisdom. And don't ask me what to eat or when to eat it. Listen to your body.
Well done. Well said. Well, I'm looking forward to the book coming out, and I appreciate you sending me this because I'm going to keep going through it. So yeah, coming out in what is it, January 4th?
Yeah, I'm so excited.
That's great.
It's really soon from today. I can't believe how fast December is going by.
I know. Time goes fast.
Who's going to wrap my Christmas presents? I'm usually all done by now, and I'm not done. I'm not.
No, you'll make it happen, just like
it always happens.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
All right, Jen. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was great, second time around, and perfect timing just for your new book to come out. So again, I appreciate everything.
Thank you for having me, Brian. You can guess, I could probably talk about it for like 5 more hours, but
I know you could. Yes.
Good.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I understand there are millions of other podcasts out there, and you've chosen to listen to mine, and I appreciate that. Check out the show notes at briangrin.com for everything that was mentioned in this episode. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend or family member that's looking to get their body back to what it once was. Thanks again, and have a great day.